They said St. Mercy Hospital burned down in an accident, but I've seen the photos they never released. Patients strapped to beds, their eyes white, their jaws unhinged. If you think zombies started in 2015, you're wrong. It began here in 2010, and someone made sure the truth never left that building. And if you're hearing this, you'll understand why survivors like me were never supposed to talk. Most people in town do not even remember St. Mercy Hospital. If you ask the older folks, they will give you vague answers, like it was just another clinic, or that it burned down years ago. But when you press them, when you ask why the building was erased from the maps, why its name was struck from county health records, you see their eyes change. They will lower their voice, shake their head, and quickly change the subject. According to official reports, a fire destroyed the hospital in late 2010. An electrical fault, they claimed. A tragic accident. The flames, they said, consumed patient records, staff files, and every last shred of evidence of the hospital's existence. All that remains in the public archives is a single line: facility permanently closed due to fire hazard. But that explanation never sat right with me. There were no photographs of the fire, no news broadcasts covering the tragedy, no obituaries for the supposed victims, and yet dozens of families quietly packed up and left town in the weeks that followed. When asked why, most muttered the same phrase: "We lost someone in that place." Here's what's stranger: many of the doctors and nurses who worked at St. Mercy vanished after 2010. Not moved, not retired, vanished. Their licensing files were deleted, their names stripped from state records as if they never practiced medicine at all. Even more chilling, survivors, patients who were supposedly discharged before the fire, simply disappeared. No addresses, no forwarding contacts, no medical transfers, nothing. It was as though someone somewhere wanted to erase an entire chapter of history. For years, all I had were whispers and half-stories, late-night conversations with janitors who claimed the morgue never stopped running, security guards who said they were told to shut off the cameras on certain nights, paramedics who refused to drive near St. Mercy after dark. But rumors are one thing, proof is another, and for the longest time there was no proof at all. No documents, no video, no photographs, just shadows and silences until last winter. While researching abandoned hospitals in the state archives, I stumbled upon a mislabeled storage box. Inside, under a stack of water-damaged charts, was a leather-bound notebook. The handwriting was frantic, uneven, but the name written on the inside cover was clear: Patient 211. Claire H. It was not a chart. It was a diary, and the things written inside, they were not the words of someone sick or delusional or confused. They were the desperate notes of someone trapped inside St. Mercy during the outbreak. That diary changed everything. It gave the whispers shape, the rumors weight. It turned ghost stories into a timeline, because inside those pages was the first mention of what really happened in 2010. But then I found a patient's diary, and that's when everything unraveled. Claire's diary began innocently enough. The first pages read like something any patient might write: complaints about bland meals, long nights of loneliness, and the constant beeping of machines. She wrote about her family visiting, about wanting to go home, but soon her tone shifted. One entry stood out: 2 new patients admitted last night, both coughing, violent wet coughs that kept the whole ward awake. Nurses kept their distance. They did not wear masks, but I saw one slip gloves on before touching them. Something feels wrong. From there the diary darkened. Claire described hearing strange noises echoing through the halls at night, metal doors slamming shut, heavy boots marching, hushed arguments between staff. She wrote about seeing gurneys wheeled down corridors at odd hours, always covered in black sheets, always headed toward the basement. "They told us the East Wing is under renovation," she wrote one evening. "But why did I see men in hazmat suits going in there? Why are they carrying rifles? Renovation? No, that was a lie." As the days passed, her entries grew more frantic. Patients coughing became patients collapsing. Nurses whispered that the tests went wrong. Claire tried to ask questions, but anyone who spoke too loudly was sedated, rolled away, and never seen again. One line chilled me the most. Dr. Heller told another doctor, "Contain it here or it will spread everywhere." I pretended to be asleep when I heard it. What did he mean? What are they hiding? Then came the lockdown. Claire wrote that the hospital doors were sealed. Families were turned away at the entrance. Armed guards appeared in every hallway, and yet more coughing patients kept arriving, brought in the back way, where no one outside could see. Her last clear entry was dated just 3 days before the fire. Something is happening on the 3rd floor. They moved us downstairs, but I can still hear screams through the vents. I do not think those are patients anymore. The nurses won't look me in the eye. They keep whispering, "It is spreading." After that, the handwriting grew shaky, smeared. Her final line ended halfway through a sentence. "If anyone finds this, tell them nothing followed." Just an empty half-line, the pen dragging off the page. When I turned to the next sheet, I expected another entry. But it was not words that covered the paper. It was a handprint, dark, dried, smeared across the page. Blood, the page after that, wasn't written in ink. It was smeared in blood. I thought the diary was the darkest piece of the puzzle. I was wrong. Weeks later, I found myself staring at a corrupted hard drive salvaged from an old police archive. The folder was labeled Property of St. Mercy Hospital, Do Not Review. Most of the files were corrupted, static-filled, useless. But one video still worked. The moment I pressed play, I knew why someone had tried to erase it. The footage was grainy, shot from a ceiling corner in what looked like a makeshift ward. Rows of patients were strapped to gurneys, wrists and ankles tied with thick leather restraints. At first it looked like a normal quarantine, sick people restrained for safety. But then they began to move, not restless, not uncomfortable, convulsing. Their bodies arched violently against the straps, muscles jerking in unnatural spasms. One man's jaw snapped open and shut like it was unhinged. A woman clawed at the air with bloodied fingernails until her restraints cut deep into her skin. The audio was faint, but I could hear groaning, low, guttural noises that didn't sound human. Then suddenly, one patient lurched upright so fast the leather buckles snapped. He lunged at the nearest bed, teeth sinking into another patient's neck. Blood sprayed the wall like paint. The security guards in the corner panicked. You could see them fumbling for their batons, one of them yelling into his radio. An alarm blared, flashing red lights across the room. But the panic was worse than the infection. Some patients tore free of their straps and charged at the guards, teeth gnashing. Others thrashed so hard they broke bones just trying to stand. The guards fought back, but you could tell they were unprepared. One dropped his weapon, slipped in the blood, and disappeared under a mass of writhing bodies. The chaos was unbearable to watch, but one detail made my stomach twist. The timestamp October 14th, 2010, 11:32 p.m. The night before the official records say the fire destroyed St. Mercy. The hospital was not destroyed by accident. It was already falling apart. The video cut to static for a few seconds, then flickered back. What I saw next should have been impossible. The camera showed a hallway lined with stretchers covered in white sheets. A nurse walked by, clipboard in hand, glancing nervously at the bodies. Then one of the sheets moved, at first just a twitch, almost like settling fabric. But then the hand beneath it pushed upward, stiff, jerky, until the sheet slid to the floor. The patient underneath, pale, bloodless, eyes clouded over, sat upright. And here is the part that keeps me awake. The tag on his wrist clearly read, "Deceased." And then for years, St. Mercy Hospital was just a rumor. But rumors do not explain the things I have collected. The diary, the video, those were proof. Still, I wanted a voice, a witness. And eventually I found one. Her name was withheld in every document I dug up. But she had worked at St. Mercy as a night nurse in 2010. When I contacted her, she did not hesitate to speak, though her voice shook like every word was a crime. "We were told not to question the orders," she whispered, "even if they were already gone. Even if the machines were flatlined. We were told to keep injecting them." At first I thought I had misheard. She repeated it slower this time. They had been commanded to administer injections of something, she never knew what, into patients who were already pronounced dead. "It was madness," she said, eyes darting around as if someone might be listening. "They told us it was part of a study, that the brain stays alive longer than we think. But it was not research. It was something else, something darker." She described hushed meetings between doctors, military officials walking the halls, and a strict silence enforced among the staff. Anyone who spoke up was threatened with losing their license, or worse. We were told the fire was for our safety, she said, that it would erase everything before the world asked too many questions. But the fire did not burn hot enough to erase what we saw. Then she told me about the ambulances. While the hospital was under quarantine, she noticed vans leaving at strange hours of the night. They were not taking patients to other hospitals. They were disposing of them. Not corpses. Patients who were wrapped in black body bags, but were still moving. They told us it was muscle reflex, she said. But I heard them banging inside. I heard them screaming through the plastic. Her eyes were wet when she said it. Do you know what it feels like to zip a living human being into a bag? To feel their chest still rising, their hands twitching, and know you will never see them again? I had no answer. I could only listen as her story spiraled darker. She remembered one night in particular. A fellow nurse, pale as a ghost, pulled her aside. Her hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped her chart. She told me she saw one of the body bags move in the back of the ambulance, the woman said. Not just twitch, it sat up. It pressed against the window from the inside. The nurse swore it was not the only one. One nurse swore she saw a body bag move, and it was not the only one. The nurse's whispers painted a grim picture, but nothing prepared me for what she said next. It was not the fire that destroyed St. Mercy. It was the night everything inside went silent, except for the screaming. It started with the lights. Shortly after midnight, every hallway flickered once, twice, and then drowned in darkness. The backup generators kicked in, their low mechanical hum echoing through the walls. But then, one by one, those generators failed too. The hospital was left in a suffocating black silence, broken only by the sound of alarms and distant footsteps. And then, the patients began to move. Nurses carrying flashlights watched in horror as bedsheets rustled. IV stands toppled, and the still forms on gurneys began to rise. Some stumbled blindly. Others convulsed with violent jerks, as if electricity was firing through dead muscles. Their eyes rolled white, their mouths snapping at anything within reach. One patient tore free from leather restraints, biting through the plastic tube in his mouth, before sinking his teeth into the hand of a doctor who tried to push him back down. The doctor's scream carried across the ward, followed by more chaos as the infection spread, not through bites alone, but through the panic of realization. The staff tried to fight. They grabbed extinguishers, syringes, even metal trays, anything they could use as weapons. But the horde inside grew faster than anyone could believe, so they locked the doors. Entire wings of St. Mercy were sealed, patients still alive inside, pounding against the reinforced glass as nurses abandoned them. The survivors on each floor barricaded themselves into storage rooms and offices, praying the things outside could not break through. They told us it was containment, the nurse said, her voice breaking. But it was not containment, it was sacrifice. She described how she stood at the end of the children's ward, watching through a window as orderlies chained the doors shut with padlocks. Behind the glass, terrified children beat their fists against the pane, begging to be let out as the sound of shuffling feet drew closer. And then the screaming started, she whispered. No one unlocked the doors. On another floor, the psychiatric ward, the same was done. Every door sealed, every window covered. The patients inside were left with nothing but the dark and the growing sound of the infected closing in. Some staff refused to obey. They tried to free the trapped, to fight their way back in. They did not last long. Those who survived never spoke again, their silence bought by threats and fear. The fire did not destroy the truth of St. Mercy. The fire erased the evidence of what they did that night, and what they did to keep it. Contained was worse than the outbreak itself. The official story was neat, clean, too clean. They said St. Mercy. Hospital burned down because of an electrical fault in the basement. Old wiring. Oh, tragic accident. That was the explanation repeated in newspapers, whispered in local news broadcasts, and carefully delivered by officials who never once looked directly into the camera. But the people who lived nearby, those who saw the glow in the sky that night, told a very different story. They swore the flames did not start small. They erupted all at once, as if the hospital had been doused in accelerant. Before the fire trucks even arrived, black military trucks had already surrounded the building. Soldiers in gas masks entered through the smoke, rifles at the ready, as if they were not there to fight a fire, but to finish something inside. Neighbors claimed they heard gunfire muffled by the roaring blaze. Bursts of automatic fire echoed against the night, followed by something far worse. Inhuman shrieks carried on the wind. And yet, when the fire was finally extinguished, the official death toll was listed as undetermined. Conveniently vague. The strangest part? Families of staff members never received bodies. There were no funerals, no burials, no ashes returned. Just silence and sealed envelopes that said classified. One local firefighter broke rank years later, long after he had left the service. He admitted he and his crew had been kept back, forced to wait as soldiers entered first. When they were finally allowed inside, the fire had gutted the wards, the smell of burnt flesh lingering in the smoke. But even through the charred ruins, he noticed something that still haunted him, walls riddled with bullet holes, not burn scars. He swore he saw a trail of blood across the floor that ended at a collapsed stairwell, but the report he signed made no mention of it. The government wanted the fire to be the final word, a clean end to an unclean event. But for those who had lived through it, the few who managed to escape before the doors were locked, it was not the end. It was the beginning of something worse. One nurse who fled the scene described watching a soldier drag a body bag out of the flames. She swore she saw the bag twitch. The soldier struck it with the butt of his rifle until it stopped moving, then shoved it into the back of a truck. No one ever saw where that truck went. The cover-up was not about protecting the public from panic. It was about hiding what St. Mercy had unleashed. But why were there bullet holes in the walls, not burn marks? When the flames at St. Mercy finally died, the story should have ended. The hospital was gone, reduced to a skeleton of blackened steel and ash. Officials told grieving families their loved ones had perished in the fire. There were no funerals, no coffins lowered into the ground. Just words, empty condolences backed by sealed reports. But the families knew something was wrong. Mothers who demanded to see their children's remains were told the bodies had been unrecoverable. Husbands who begged for death. Certificates were handed vague papers with signatures that looked forged. It was as if their loved ones had been erased, wiped out not by flames but by intention. And then the sightings began. At first, they were dismissed as grief-induced delusions. A widow claimed she saw her husband on the subway 2 weeks after the fire. He looked thin, pale, his clothes disheveled. She called his name, but he turned his head too slowly, as if the sound of it took longer to reach him. His eyes, she said, were not the same. Others reported coughing figures stumbling through alleyways near the ruins of the hospital. They moved like drunks, but there was no alcohol on their breath. Instead, their skin carried the stench of disinfectant and rot, a chemical tang mixed with sickness. Some had bandages still clinging to their wrists and forearms, like patients who had torn free from IV drips. Neighbors whispered about the sick ones who appeared only at night, wandering streets with vacant stares. Police were called, but by the time authorities arrived, there was never anyone there. It was as though these figures knew when to disappear. Weeks later, a city morgue attendant broke his silence. He claimed unidentified bodies were delivered in unmarked vans, bodies that were not burned at all. Some were emaciated, covered in rashes, coughing even in their final moments. Others had eyes clouded in a milky white haze, their jaws clenched so tightly that their teeth cracked. These bodies were quietly buried in unmarked graves. The public never heard about it. The families never knew. The scariest part? Not all of the survivors were dead when people saw them. Some walked among the living, blending in poorly, their movements stiff, their voices slurred, as if speech was something they were struggling to remember. That is when I stopped doubting the rumors, because one of those survivors was someone I recognized. He was not a stranger on a subway platform or a nameless figure in an alley. He was someone I had grown up with. I know because one of them was my cousin. For years, everyone believed infection was simple. You were bitten, you turned. That was the story repeated in survival guides, whispered in panicked broadcasts, scrawled on desperate warning signs left behind by the first victims. But what happened at St. Mercy suggested something far worse. Not everyone who died that year had bite marks. Some of them simply collapsed with fever, their bodies shaking with violent seizures, before their eyes rolled back and their lips frothed with blood. They were carried into emergency rooms coughing, gasping for air like drowning victims, and by morning they were gone. The next night some of them were back on their feet. It spread quietly. No blood splatter, no claw marks, just a cough in a crowded hallway, a sneeze in a waiting room, a fever that swept across families like wildfire. The survivors who escaped the blaze described symptoms that sounded less like infection and more like influenza: sweats, tremors, rashes, mucus so thick it drowned their lungs before the so-called death set in. Some even reported auditory hallucinations, hearing whispers in the halls, voices calling their names from empty rooms. Doctors wrote these off as fever dreams, but what if they were not? If the outbreak at St. Mercy was not caused by bites, then what was it? Some whispered about a second pathogen, one designed not to spread through teeth and blood, but through the air itself. Invisible. Inevitable. If that was true, then the fire at the hospital was not meant to end an accident. It was meant to erase the evidence of an experiment, because what if St. Mercy was never just a hospital? Old building permits suggested entire sublevels had been added years before the fire, basements that were never used for patient care, restricted wings where no visitors were allowed, and the files, those few that survived the flames, listed drugs and trial numbers that matched nothing in public medical records. This was not treatment. This was testing. The electrical fault that officials clung to was just the smokescreen. The truth is that St. Mercy might have been the first test site for something larger, a controlled outbreak, a laboratory dressed up as a place of healing. And when it slipped beyond their control, when patients began to rise and the sickness began to spread, the only way to hide the evidence was to burn it all down. But here is the part that keeps me awake at night. If St. Mercy was a test, then it was not the only one, and the hospital was not the only test site. At first, St. Mercy seemed like an isolated tragedy, a hospital fire, a few dozen dead, a story quickly forgotten once the rubble cooled. But the deeper I dug, the harder it became to believe it was an accident. Because St. Mercy wasn't the only facility that burned. In 2006, there was a fire at a veterans clinic in Ohio. No survivors, no bodies recovered. Official cause: electrical malfunction. In 2008, a private care center in rural Texas erupted in flames during a gas leak. Witnesses swore they saw military trucks parked outside hours before the fire. In 2010, just 2 months before St. Mercy, a children's research ward in Florida was evacuated, then mysteriously sealed. Days later, the building was ash. Every single location, different states, different years, was linked by a single thread: outbreaks. Strange illnesses, unexplained deaths, patients who were reported missing before the fires, and the paperwork, what little survived the flames, always carried the same shadow signature. The same pharmaceutical contracts, the same coded trial numbers, the same hidden hands. I laid out the dates on the wall, pinned them in order. The picture was undeniable. Each accident was not random. It was part of a sequence. Outbreak, panic, silence, fire. Over and over again. They weren't just putting out flames. They were cleaning up experiments. The people at St. Mercy weren't victims of a tragedy. They were part of a controlled rehearsal, a drill masked as disaster, something to test what would happen when the sickness escaped, when the public saw too much. And once the damage was done, once the evidence began to spread, they burned it all. Some call it containment. But if you look at the pattern, it wasn't about safety. It was about control, about managing the narrative. The survivors were silenced, the witnesses discredited, and the dead? They were buried without names, without questions. The files point to a plan bigger than a single hospital, bigger than a single outbreak. They suggest the fires were never about preventing infection. They were about erasing proof of something the world was never meant to see, and that leads to one terrifying conclusion. If St. Mercy wasn't the beginning, then it wasn't the end either. And if that's true, then what happened in 2010 was just a rehearsal, I thought I was chasing a story about a forgotten fire. But what I uncovered was something far darker. Something I should have left buried. One of the last people I spoke to was a nurse. Not just any nurse. She had been there inside St. Mercy the night it burned. She was older now, sick, her voice shaky from years of silence. But when I asked her why she never came forward, her answer froze me. They told us hospitals were safe, she whispered. But that night I learned the truth. They're not sanctuaries. They're cages. Her eyes darted toward the door like she expected someone to burst in at any moment. She leaned closer, gripping my hand. If it ever spreads again, she said, don't trust the hospitals. Don't go near them, because that's where they'll put you. Not to heal you, but to study you, to keep you locked away until you're not you anymore. I tried to ask more, but she broke down. She said she'd already said too much. She begged me not to use her name, not to record her face. They'll find me, she said. They always do. That was 3 weeks ago. Since then, things have been different. I've noticed the same black SUV parked outside my apartment 2 nights in a row. My emails keep disappearing, like someone is erasing the trail before I can finish writing. And last night, I swear someone tried my door. I don't know how much longer I have to keep digging before they decide I've gone too far. Maybe I already have. So I'm saying this now while I still can. If another outbreak happens, and God help us, I think it will, do not believe the story they give you. Do not walk through those sliding glass doors thinking you'll be saved. Because the nurse was right. Hospitals are not for saving lives. Not anymore. They're for keeping the infection quiet. They're for testing limits. And they're for burying the truth, one burned building at a time. If you're hearing this, it means one thing: I got the story out. But if this video disappears, if you search for it tomorrow and it's gone, then you'll know they found me too.